Pastor John Gray, he leads the Relentless Church. It's an evangelical megachurch with some 22,000 members, many of whom weren't so happy when they learned of his very generous gift to his wife.
The worst scandals in the pulpit do not start with money. They start with trust. A congregation believes a pastor is protecting them, praying for them, and leading them closer to God. But in these cases, faith became a business model. Donations became private wealth, and the people who trusted the most often paid the highest price. Number 15. Reverend Ike. Before prosperity preaching became a full-blown industry, Reverend Ike helped turn it into a national brand. Born Frederick J. Ikerenquetter II, he became one of the most famous black televangelists in America by preaching a message that sounded very different from traditional Christian humility. He did not tell people to accept poverty. He told them to expect wealth, claim abundance, and see financial success as proof of spiritual power. To his followers, that message felt empowering. To his critics, it felt like faith being turned into sales psychology. Reverend Ike became known for luxury, flashy presentation, and unapologetic wealth. He filled theaters, dominated radio and television, and built a ministry where money was never treated as something separate from spirituality. His place on this list is not because of a famous criminal conviction. It is because he helped create the blueprint. He showed future televangelists that the pulpit could become a stage, that spiritual language could sell financial dreams, and that followers desperate for a better life could be convinced to fund the image of a preacher who already looked rich. Number 14. Juanita Bynum. Juanita Bynum became famous because of her intensity. Her sermons were emotional, direct, and deeply personal, especially for women who felt wounded, overlooked, or spiritually exhausted. Her "No More Sheets" message made her a major name in black Christian circles, and for years she was seen as someone who could speak to pain in a way few preachers could. But the controversy around Bynum came when prayer itself started looking like a luxury product. Her prayer institute drew backlash because the reported price was nearly $1,500 for an intensive course. That is where critics said the line had been crossed. Teaching, conferences, books, and ministry events can all cost money, but charging struggling believers a premium price to learn how to pray struck many people as deeply wrong.
Dr. Juanita Bynum has been ministering for 53 years, but it was the last 14 years in a black hole that was the most life-changing.
Bynum defended the course by pointing to her experience and decades in ministry. But for critics, that defense only made the issue bigger. The question was not whether she had knowledge. The question was whether something as basic and sacred as prayer should ever be packaged like elite coaching. Her scandal represents a softer kind of pulpit corruption. Not a courtroom crime, but the commercialization of spiritual hunger. Number 13. John Gray. John Gray's controversy exploded because one gift became a symbol of everything people already feared about megachurch culture. As pastor of Relentless Church in Greenville, South Carolina, Gray already had a major platform, a celebrity following, and a reputation for emotional preaching. Then he gave his wife a Lamborghini Urus, reportedly worth around $200,000. Gray insisted that no church money was used and that he had income from books, television, and other work. But perception mattered. To many viewers, the image of a pastor gifting a luxury SUV while leading a congregation was too much. It became a viral example of the gap between the average church member and the celebrity pastor lifestyle. The story grew worse when Relentless Church became tangled in property disputes and lawsuits involving unpaid bills, wages, and church facilities. Again, not every controversy is a criminal conviction, but for many people, the Lamborghini became the perfect visual. A pastor explaining sacrifice from the front of a church while living like an entertainer behind the scenes. John Gray's case shows how quickly trust can crack when spiritual leadership starts looking like celebrity branding. Number 12. Jamal Bryant. Jamal Bryant has always known how to create attention. As senior pastor of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church near Atlanta, he inherited one of the most famous black churches in America after the Eddie Long era. Bryant's style mixed preaching, politics, activism, and media fluency. But his controversies came from the same thing that made him powerful. He knew how to turn the pulpit into a headline. The biggest backlash came when he publicly discussed the idea of using cannabis business opportunities to bring black men back to church and teach entrepreneurship. Some people saw the idea as creative outreach. Others saw it as another example of the church drifting into business schemes while dressing them up as ministry. That controversy mattered because New Birth already carried baggage from earlier scandals. Bryant was not entering a neutral space. He was leading a church that needed trust rebuilt. So when the cannabis remarks went viral, critics asked whether this was ministry innovation or another attempt to turn a sacred space into a marketplace. Bryant's entry is not about a proven criminal scandal. It is about the blurred line between outreach, branding, politics, and business. In modern megachurch culture, that line can become dangerously thin. Number 11. Creflo Dollar. Creflo Dollar became one of the most recognizable faces of prosperity gospel in America. His church, World Changers Church International, grew into a massive ministry based in Georgia, and his message was simple. Faith and financial increase were deeply connected. To his supporters, he preached confidence, giving, and breakthrough. To his critics, he turned Christianity into a wealth machine. The moment that defined the controversy came when his ministry launched a campaign connected to a $65 million Gulfstream jet. The campaign was later dropped after public outrage, but the damage was already done. For many people, it confirmed what they had suspected for years, that prosperity preaching often asks working people to fund luxury in the name of spreading the gospel. Creflo Dollar later made headlines for changing his teaching on tithing, saying he had taught some things incorrectly. But critics argued that the damage from decades of prosperity messaging could not simply be undone with one correction. Dollar represents one of the central questions in this entire video. When a pastor gets rich teaching people to give, where does faith end and financial pressure begin? Number 10. Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton is not a traditional church pastor in the same way as many others on this list. He is a minister, activist, media figure, and founder of the National Action Network. But his controversies belong in this conversation because his moral authority, public activism, and religious identity often overlap. Sharpton built his career around speaking for communities that felt ignored or mistreated. He became a major civil rights voice, a television host, and a power broker with access to presidents, mayors, corporations, and national media. But his financial record has repeatedly drawn scrutiny, especially around tax liens, unpaid taxes, nonprofit management, and the blurred relationship between activism and personal influence. Sharpton has denied that he simply avoided his obligations, saying payment arrangements existed and debts were being addressed. But critics argue that his case shows how public moral authority can become financially complicated when the same figure controls activism, media access, fundraising, speaking fees, and nonprofit influence. His scandal is not about one church offering plate. It is about something bigger: how a religious public platform can become political currency, and how financial accountability can get buried under a powerful public image. Number 9. Bishop Eddie Long. Bishop Eddie Long led New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Atlanta into megachurch history. At its peak, New Birth had tens of thousands of members, a massive campus, national influence, and a pastor whose style was commanding, masculine, and deeply tied to authority. Long was not just a preacher, he was a brand. But his image cracked in two directions. First came financial scrutiny. Reporting showed that Long's charity had provided him with millions in salary, benefits, and property use over several years, raising serious questions about how a religious nonprofit was serving its leader versus its mission. Then came the lawsuits. Multiple young men accused Long of using his spiritual authority, gifts, trips, and influence to coerce them into sexual relationships.
Jamal Paris says he's now haunted by a father figure, Bishop Eddie Long, pastor of New Birth Missionary Baptist, one of America's most powerful megachurches.
Long denied wrongdoing, and the cases were settled out of court. Because there was no criminal conviction, the wording matters. These remain allegations settled privately. But the damage to trust was enormous. The scandal hurt because Long had preached authority, discipline, and morality from one of the most influential pulpits in Black America. When the accusations surfaced, the question became unavoidable. What happens when the man preaching accountability is accused of exploiting the very people who saw him as a spiritual father? Number 8. Robbie Wilkerson. Robbie Wilkerson's case did not have the same celebrity profile as some megachurch scandals, but it cuts deep because of who the money was supposed to help. Wilkerson was the founding pastor of New Birth Christian Center in Chicago, and the scandal centered on a summer food program meant to feed low-income children when school was out. According to federal prosecutors, Wilkerson and others defrauded the program by submitting false claims and misusing funds. He eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 37 months in prison. The reason this case belongs here is simple. Stealing from a church is bad, but stealing through a program designed to feed children carries a special kind of betrayal. The public often focuses on flashy pastor scandals because luxury cars and private jets make better headlines. But cases like Wilkerson's show the quieter side of corruption: forms, reimbursements, grants, and community programs that can be exploited without ever looking glamorous. This was not prosperity gospel in a designer suit. It was fraud wearing the mask of community service. Number 7. Corey McGill Brown. Corey McGill Brown was the former pastor of Second African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia, a historic kind of church where members expect stewardship, tradition, and trust. Instead, prosecutors said Brown defrauded his own church and parishioners for years. He pleaded guilty to mail fraud and was sentenced to 28 months in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay more than $178,000 in restitution. What made the case painful was not just the amount. It was the method. Church members believed they were supporting ministry, helping their congregation function, and contributing to a spiritual home. Instead, federal prosecutors said their trust was abused by the very man appointed to lead them. This is the kind of scandal that rarely gets the national attention of a televangelist meltdown, but for the people inside the church, it is devastating. A local congregation is not just a building. It is baptisms, funerals, weddings, Sunday school, old members, children, and family memory. When a pastor steals from that, he is not just taking money. He is damaging the emotional center of a community. Number 6. Adrian Darrell Davis. Adrian Darrell Davis represents the modern version of church fraud. Credit cards, luxury purchases, tax returns, and a digital paper trail that prosecutors can follow. Davis was the former pastor of All Nations Worship Assembly in Huntsville, Alabama. According to federal authorities, he used his position to embezzle more than $434,000 from the church between 2018 and 2020.
A former Huntsville pastor received his sentence after embezzling more than $400,000 from his church. Adrian Davis will spend 5 years in prison. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud.
The details were especially damaging because prosecutors said church funds paid for luxury purchases, including expensive jewelry and designer goods. Davis also pleaded guilty to wire fraud and filing a false tax return and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. This case matters because it strips away the dramatic language and shows corruption in its most direct form. No theological debate, no celebrity misunderstanding, no complicated public persona, just a pastor entrusted with church resources using those resources for himself. It also shows why financial systems matter in churches. Good intentions are not enough. Spiritual trust is not an accounting structure. When one person has too much control and too little oversight, temptation becomes easier to hide. Davis's downfall is a reminder that every church needs transparency before scandal forces it. Number 5. Kirby John Caldwell. Kirby John Caldwell's fall shocked people because he was not seen as a fringe preacher. He was a respected Houston megachurch pastor, former leader of Windsor Village United Methodist Church, and a spiritual advisor connected to presidents. That made his conviction even more stunning. Caldwell pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud in connection with a multi-million-dollar investment scheme involving worthless Chinese bonds. Prosecutors said victims were persuaded to invest in bonds that had no real value. Caldwell was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. What makes this case stand out is the level of trust involved. Caldwell was educated, connected, and respected. People did not just see him as a preacher. They saw him as a man with influence, financial knowledge, and credibility. That credibility became part of the problem. When a local unknown pastor tricks people, the betrayal is painful. But when a nationally respected religious leader connected to presidents becomes part of a fraud case, it tells people that status is not the same as integrity. Caldwell later expressed remorse and made restitution efforts, but the scandal remains a powerful warning. Influence can make a pastor more dangerous when followers assume success equals trustworthiness. Number 4. Reverend Henry Lyons. Reverend Henry Lyons once held one of the most powerful positions in Black church life.
Lyons was president of the National Baptist Convention in the 1990s, but his legacy was later marred by a high-profile fraud scandal that sent him to prison.
As president of the National Baptist Convention, USA, he was connected to millions of believers and led one of the largest Black denominations in the country. That made his downfall one of the biggest religious corruption scandals in modern American history. Lyons was convicted of racketeering and grand theft. Prosecutors said he and an associate used the denomination's influence to sell fraudulent membership lists and divert money. One of the most disturbing details involved donations meant to help rebuild burned Black churches. Instead of becoming healing for communities already wounded by attacks, that money became part of the scandal. The case exploded publicly when Lyons' wife discovered a hidden luxury home and set it on fire, triggering even more attention. Suddenly, what had been hidden behind church respectability became a national spectacle. Lyons' story is one of the clearest examples of institutional religious power being. This was not just a pastor with a luxury car. This was a denominational leader with massive influence, accused and convicted of turning one of the most important platforms in Black religious America into a personal enrichment machine. Number 3. David E. Taylor. David E. Taylor's case is one of the most current and serious on this list, but it must be handled carefully because the federal case is based on charges and allegations, not a final conviction. Taylor led Kingdom of God Global Church, formerly known as Joshua Media Ministries International, and presented himself as a prophet with extraordinary spiritual access. Federal prosecutors allege that Taylor and other leaders ran a multi-state forced labor and money laundering conspiracy through ministry call centers. The Justice Department described allegations of workers being coerced into soliciting donations, meeting financial goals, and living under controlling conditions. Prosecutors say the operation raised tens of millions of dollars. Again, these are allegations unless and until proven in court. But the reason this case ranks so high is the severity of what the government claims happened. Spiritual authority allegedly used not only to collect money, but to control labor, movement, and daily life. If true, Taylor's case would represent one of the darkest forms of modern religious exploitation, a ministry structure operating less like a church and more like an engine for money and control. Number 2. Lamor Whitehead. Lamor Whitehead became known to the internet as the Bling Bishop, and for a while, his story seemed almost unreal. He preached in designer clothing, drove luxury vehicles, flashed expensive jewelry, and built an image that looked more like celebrity culture than church leadership. Then, in 2022, he and his wife were robbed at gunpoint during a live-streamed church service in Brooklyn, with jewelry stolen on camera.
Bishop in Brooklyn was robbed at gunpoint in the middle of a church service. The crime was caught on the church's live stream yesterday. Bishop Lamor Whitehead says 3 men with guns stole hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of jewelry from him and his wife.
That shocking moment made him famous far beyond his congregation. But the robbery was only the beginning of the real scandal. Federal prosecutors later proved that Whitehead had defrauded a parishioner out of approximately $90,000 in retirement savings by promising to help her buy a home, then spent the money on himself. He was also convicted of attempted extortion and lying to federal agents. In 2024, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Whitehead's case became a symbol because it had everything: luxury, live stream drama, political connections, victim betrayal, and a federal conviction. The jewelry made him visible. The fraud made him infamous. His downfall proved that the flashiest preacher in the room is not always blessed. Sometimes he is just hiding behind the shine. Number 1, Malachi York. At number 1 is a case that goes far beyond ordinary church corruption. Malachi York, also known as Dwight York, led the United Nubian Nation of Moors and built a strange, highly controlled religious movement that eventually established an Egyptian-themed compound in rural Georgia. York presented himself as a prophet, teacher, spiritual leader, and almost mythic figure. His followers built a world around him. The compound had pyramids, symbols, rituals, teachings, and total loyalty. But behind the image was one of the darkest religious cases in America. York was convicted on racketeering and offenses involving minors and was sentenced to 135 years in federal prison. His case is not just about financial manipulation. It is about what can happen when a religious leader becomes untouchable inside a closed world. Followers surrendered money, labor, family boundaries, and independent judgment, while the leader's power grew unchecked. That is why York sits at the top. His scandal was not only about greed, it was about total control. The most dangerous corrupted pastor is not always the one with the biggest mansion or the flashiest car. Sometimes it is the one who convinces people that questioning him is the same as questioning God. These scandals are not an attack on faith. They are a warning about power without accountability. When pastors turn trust into control, the damage can last for generations. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment which case shocked you the most.